Some wounds are not visible. Not because they are not real, they are often the most real things we carry, but because we have learned, over time, not to show them. Not to hide them exactly, just to carry them privately. In the space behind the professional self, in the quieter hours when the work is done, in the specific way we think about certain people, certain moments, certain chapters of a life that had both beauty and loss inside them. Gene Kelly was one of the most physically gifted performers of the 20th century. The films he made, Singin' in the Rain, An American in Paris, On the Town, contain sequences that remain, decades later, among the most purely joyful things ever put on screen. The athleticism, the musicality, the particular quality of a man who had synthesized dance and film in a way that had simply not existed before him. People who saw those films in theaters in the 1940s and 50s described the experience as something close to elation, a physical, embodied joy communicated through movement that reached audiences in a place beyond language. The work was extraordinary, and it demanded, in its production, an almost total investment of his energy and attention and physical self. But inside the life that produced that work, inside the man who made those films, there was a loss he did not often speak about. His first marriage, to Betsy Blair, lasted over a decade and ended in divorce. He had a daughter with her, Carrie, whom he loved deeply. The ending of the marriage, with all the specific grief that the ending of a long partnership carries, the dissolution of what had been hoped for, the particular pain of a family rearranging itself, was something he processed privately. In the way that men of that generation, in that industry, processed private pain. Quietly. Off camera. In the spaces the work left. He kept dancing. He kept directing. He kept investing himself fully in the next film, the next sequence, the next creative challenge. And the loss was there, not absent, not resolved, but carried alongside the work. Years later, in his 70s, he spoke in interviews about what he had learned from the losses that life had brought, about the things he wished he had understood sooner, about the way that the demands of a consuming professional life could take precedence over the people in it, not through malice, not through a failure of love, but through the particular tyranny of work that feels urgent and important, and that offers an identity you are reluctant to step back from. He talked about these things with a clarity that had the quality of things long reflected upon. Not resolved. Grief does not quite resolve. But seen. Understood, finally, for what they were. The cost of the choices. The real, permanent, worth-naming cost. He also talked about what the dancing had given him, not just professionally, but personally. The physicality of it. The way that expression through the body could reach places that expression through language could not. The particular release of it, the ability to put something through movement that had no other form. And he acknowledged, in those later conversations, that some of what drove the dancing, some of the intensity with which he had pursued the work, had to do with what was present in the rest of his life. The joy in the films was real, but it was not separate from the difficulty. It was, in some ways, a response to it, a way of making something beautiful out of what was also hard. Maybe you understand that impulse. The impulse to put what cannot easily be spoken into something that can be expressed differently, into work, into care for others, into a daily practice that gives form to the feeling that has no other outlet. Many people process their deepest wounds in exactly this way, not by talking about them directly, but by finding forms through which something of them can be expressed and released and transformed. The form varies. The impulse is nearly universal. What do you carry quietly? What is the wound that has been in the background of your life, not consuming, not the primary thing, but present, that you have not fully turned toward? The loss that was real and significant, and that you have continued to carry without fully naming what it cost. The grief that sits behind the ordinary productivity of your days. The old hurt that still shows up in certain moments, certain conversations, certain silences that carry a weight you recognize but do not always examine. These are worth naming. Not necessarily to anyone else, but privately, to yourself. With the clarity that Gene Kelly arrived at in his 70s, not in the heat of the wound, but looking back, with enough distance to see what it was and what it had cost, and what it had also unexpectedly given. Because the wound and the gift are often not separate things. The loss and what you built in response to it, the way the difficult thing drove you toward something, shaped your particular sensibilities, gave you a depth of understanding you might not have developed without it. These are often the same event, seen from different angles. Gene Kelly's loss contributed to the intensity of his work. The grief in the life gave depth to the joy in the films. Not because the grief was good, it was real, and it cost real things. But because nothing that deep is without its influence. Nothing we carry for long years does not, in some form, become part of what we make of our time. Healing, in this context, is not the undoing of the loss. It is the arriving at a clear, honest, compassionate accounting of it. The ability to say, "This happened. It cost this. I carried it in these ways, some more useful than others. And it also contributed this. And I am still here. And the accounting is complete enough now that I can hold it without being undone by it." That is what Gene Kelly arrived at. In his own time, in his own way. Through decades of the work and the reflection that the work eventually made possible. He kept dancing, in one form or another, into his 70s. Teaching, choreographing, talking about the work with the students who came to learn from him. And the people who knew him in those later years described the same quality they had always seen in the films. A genuine, embodied, wholly authentic joy in the movement. Not untouched by the years, but not diminished either. The joy had survived the difficulty, had been formed by it in some ways, had persisted through the losses, and emerged on the other side still real, still available. Still the most true thing about him. That is what the work of healing makes possible. Not the elimination of the loss, the survival of the real. The persistence through and after the difficulty of what you genuinely are. Your joy, your care, your particular gifts and their particular expressions. These can survive what you have been through. They have already survived it in many ways. The work is simply to acknowledge this, to name what you have carried and to recognize what has persisted in spite of it. And in that recognition, to let what is real take a little more room. So take a slow breath and let yourself acknowledge, quietly and without performance, one thing you have carried for a long time. A loss, a wound, a grief that has been in the background without being fully named. You do not have to resolve it today. You do not have to speak it to anyone. Just name it privately with honesty. It was real. It cost something real. And you have been carrying it in your own particular way through the years that followed. That is worth acknowledging. And the acknowledging is itself a form of care for the person you were when it happened, and for the person you have been in the years of carrying it. Gene Kelly arrived at that care, eventually, in his own time. And it is available to you, too, in yours. One final thought worth sitting with. The things we carry quietly are not smaller for being quiet. They are sometimes the largest things we have ever dealt with, the losses that were real and significant and that we simply did not have a language for at the time, or a space in which to process them fully. And the carrying, the years of holding something real without fully examining it, is itself a form of endurance that deserves recognition. You have been carrying something for a long time, perhaps, without putting it down, without fully naming it. And through all of it, you have continued. You have kept going in your own way with the weight. That is not a small thing. That is, quietly, something remarkable. Gene Kelly danced through an enormous amount. The work required it. Life required it. And he gave what was asked day after day with a quality of genuine investment that never quite diminished. The loss was there, and the dancing was there. Both real, both important, both part of the whole of a life that was, in the end, remarkable. Your life is like that too. The wound and the persistence, the loss and what you kept going toward, both real, both yours, and both worth honoring in whatever quiet way you can.